Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but left the public divided. These are not your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. Now, imagine this. It's a quiet night in Washington, D.C., Jason Lewis, a 42-year-old employee of the city's Department of Parks and Recreation, is at home when he hears a sound outside, something unsettling. He steps to his window and sees what looks like a group of individuals tampering with vehicles on his street. His heart races as he watches from a distance, trying to assess what's happening. He believes he's witnessing a crime in action, possibly a car break-in, right outside his front door. As Lewis watches, he makes a choice. Now, instead of calling 911, he decides to go outside and confront whoever is out there. Grabbing his licensed handgun, he steps into the night, intent on protecting his neighborhood. He sees a young boy, 13-year-old Karon Blake, who he believes is involved in the break-ins. In the tense moments that follow, a confrontation ensues, leading to a fatal outcome. Lewis fires his weapon, hitting Blake, who falls to the ground. And within moments, it is over and a young life is lost. The aftermath is immediate and profound. Neighbors awaken to the sound of gunfire, and soon the police arrive on the scene. The questions begin almost as soon as the dust settles. Was this truly an act of self-defense, or did things go too far? Jason Lewis says he feared for his life in those tense moments, but many argue that Blake was unarmed and posed no direct threat. This case has sparked intense debate across Washington, D.C. and beyond, and here we're going to dive deep into this case. It's left many people asking, where is the line between defending yourself and becoming the aggressor? Stick with me as we explore the facts, the arguments, and the very difficult questions surrounding this tragedy. As news of Karon Blake's death spread, public reaction was immediate and it was impassioned. Community members, activists, local leaders were all quick to weigh in, each with their own perspective on what happened that night. For some, the incident highlighted the growing frustration and fear many residents feel about neighborhood safety. But for others, it raised deeper questions about responsibility, restraint, and the limits of self-defense. In the days following the shooting, protests erupted, with locals calling for justice for Karon Blake. They questioned why an adult would confront a young boy with a firearm rather than call for help. And this situation happens a lot when people cannot tell anyone's ages. We have people running around in hoodies and different jackets and things. And at night, it's very hard to tell. And in quick moments when you're making a decision, there's always that question, do you have time to ask or figure out their age, find out if they have a weapon, and get into what their intentions are? Or is it just such a quick situation that you react in the best interest of saving yourself? And is that wrong? It's always touchy in these kinds of cases. Now, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser herself stepped forward and urged residents to avoid taking matters into their own hands because as things were erupting, it wasn't really helping. She emphasized the importance of contacting authorities in situations like these instead. For many, this case was not just about one night. It spoke to the broader issues of vigilantism and the potential dangers when civilians decide to act on their own. But now on the other side, some argued Lewis was justified. He had a duty to protect his property and the community. And they pointed out that he was licensed to carry that firearm, and he acted within his legal rights, especially when he perceived an immediate threat. And the word here is perceive. Courts cannot define exactly what someone is perceiving, and that's also what makes these cases so difficult. Lewis said he felt genuinely threatened, stating that Blake's movement toward him in the dark created a very tense and uncertain moment. But at the heart of this case lies that fundamental question. Did he act in self-defense? Did he cross a line when he chose to pursue and confront an unarmed child? Now here the question is, when he chose to pursue and confront an unarmed child, in that situation, again, did he know that this was a child and that they were unarmed? And how could he know? It's very difficult. We are going to explore this very complex and polarizing case from all angles, reconstructing what happened, examine the arguments from both sides, and take a closer look at the community's response. And then by the end, you're going to have a chance to decide for yourself if justice was served. When it comes to cases like this, the questions are not always straightforward. On one side, we have the man, Jason Lewis, who believed he was acting in self-defense, a legal right that countless people in this country hold dear. Self-defense laws are designed to protect individuals who genuinely fear for their lives or safety, giving them the right to use force if necessary. But here's where things get tricky. Can a person claim self-defense when facing an unarmed teenager? What are the boundaries of reasonable action in a situation like this? Karon Blake was just 13. He was unarmed, and as some would argue, no immediate threat to anyone's life, much less Lewis's. And to many, this fact alone is enough to cast doubt on the self-defense claim. There is a difference between defending yourself against a direct, undeniable threat and acting out of a perceived fear that may not be grounded in reality. So at what point does a defensive action shift into something more? Was this an unfortunate miscalculation? Or did Lewis's fear drive him to take things too far? And let's not forget the social impact of a case like this. Karon was a young black teenager, and Jason Lewis was an older man, armed with a gun, holding the power to end a life in just one moment. The racial dynamics here add another layer of complexity, as cases involving black victims and unarmed civilians often carry a weight that extends beyond the individuals involved. For some, this incident raises painful reminders of other instances where young black lives have been lost under similar circumstances. But could this man see exactly who this young boy was in the dark while moving fast in the night? Was killing a young black man an intent? A young black teenager at that? It's a difficult question. It's not just about self-defense when it comes to a case like this, unfortunately, though, because there are new things that come into play. A lot of people looked at this case. It involved the community, and people wanted to understand how we view and sometimes misjudge the actions and intentions of others based on who they are. And is that what happened here? This tragedy forces us to confront our assumptions about safety and risk and the roles we play in our own communities. When Lewis saw Blake that night, did he see a teenager who might need guidance? Did he see a threat? And if it is the latter, was that perception justified? And who gets to decide if how we perceive something is right or wrong? At what point does our instinct to protect cross a line into aggression? And as we continue, keep these questions in mind because they're at the very heart of this case, and they are going to shape how we view every action that was taken. Now, beyond the immediate questions of self-defense, this case speaks to a larger issue. What responsibility does a civilian hold when they choose to confront someone they suspect of wrongdoing? By stepping outside to engage with Karon, Jason Lewis made a choice to put himself in a position of authority. But was he prepared for the potential consequences of that choice? When a person takes on the role of protector, does that come with a greater responsibility to exercise caution or more authority to protect? Some would argue that a gun introduces an irreversible element of danger, and once it's in play, every choice matters that much more. In situations like this, it's not just about the legality of carrying a weapon, it's about the weight of knowing when and if to actually use it on someone else. Lewis might have thought that he was doing the right thing by confronting what he saw as a threat. But in that moment, did he truly understand the power he held and the life-altering risk he was about to take? And then meanwhile, you have Karon's family and supporters. And this case brings up difficult questions about how young people, especially young Black men, are perceived in their own communities. When someone sees a teenager outside late at night, what assumptions come to mind? Well, there are curfews. They're supposed to be getting ready for school the next day, things like this. So you automatically, for most people, think there's something going on here, they're up to no good. Do we instinctively view them as a threat? Is this what usually happens, what I described? Or are you going to look outside and see a young person who might need help and guidance? Maybe both. First, you're going to try to stop whatever wrongdoing is happening, if that's what you think, and then maybe find out why they're doing it. This is a pattern that people do. You protect first and find out why later, because the threat is immediate in someone's perception. So at the heart of this issue is really the way we interpret behavior, and based on our own fears and biases and past experiences, we are going to assess a threat based on threats we have seen, things we have experienced, how things have been explained to us, and how that has happened for me will be different than the next guy. This adds another layer of difficulty in these cases. And as we dig deeper here, I invite you to think about the role of community safety and personal responsibility. Is there ever a time when it's justified for a resident to take action into their own hands? And if so, where's the line? And can you draw it every time? Can we blanket a law across incidences like this? Keep these questions in mind as we turn to the facts of the night and explore what we know and don't know about that fateful moment between Jason Lewis and Karon Blake. Okay, so to fully understand this case, let's step back and look at the events leading up to that night. It was the early morning hours of January 7th of 2023 in a residential neighborhood in Washington, D.C. You have Jason Lewis, a 42-year-old city employee. He's at home and he hears noises outside. Now, according to his account, he noticed movement around parked cars on his street, and he believed that someone might be trying to break into vehicles. And he decides to go outside and investigate. And I want to point this out. Vehicle break-ins are on a rise across the country, so think about this because it could happen to you if your car is parked outside anywhere. All right, well, Lewis, who legally owned and carried a registered firearm, took his gun with him as he left his house. And when he stepped outside, he observed a figure he would later identify as 13-year-old Karon Blake. Reports indicate that Blake, who was unarmed, was in the street near several vehicles, though accounts differ on exactly what he was doing. What was he doing out there in the middle of the night around cars at all? Lewis claimed he approached Blake, asking what he was up to, and he urged him to leave. And it was at this point where the situation began to escalate. Witnesses and surveillance footage provide glimpses of what happened next. So according to Lewis, he felt threatened when Blake began moving toward him in a way that felt aggressive. In those tense moments, Lewis reportedly warned Blake to stop, but the teenager kept advancing. Feeling cornered and believing he was in immediate danger, Lewis made the decision to use his firearm. He fired a single fatal shot that struck Blake. Just moments later, Karon Blake lay on the ground, critically injured, and ultimately losing his life before emergency responders could even arrive. The immediate response from neighbors and local officials was one of shock. Police arrived quickly on the scene, securing the area and beginning their investigation. The question of self-defense arose almost instantly, with Lewis stating he acted out of fear for his own safety. However, with Blake unarmed and being so young, the nature of that threat became a point of intense scrutiny. The police gathered statements from witnesses, collected surveillance footage, and ultimately charged Lewis with manslaughter, arguing that his actions exceeded what was reasonable for self-defense. In the middle of the night, you see someone at your cars. Maybe you don't want to shoot them, but the question here is this: do you have time to figure out who it is and how old they are, what their intentions are, if they're armed or not, in the moments that you're trying to defend yourself? The facts are clear that this is a 13-year-old young black man, boy, teenager. However, how would you know that? And is it reasonable to believe you could assess all that before the crime occurred? I think that's the real question here. How many questions can you answer before you decide you have to defend yourself? And given the situation, did you have enough time to give it that assessment? And are we considering that when these kinds of cases go to court? As the investigation continued, Jason Lewis's actions came under intense scrutiny, leading to a charge of manslaughter. Now, for some, this charge felt like a necessary response to a tragic outcome involving an unarmed teen. Others, however, questioned the accountability on all sides. Karon Blake was just 13, a fact often repeated in discussions about this case. But it raises more difficult questions. Should Lewis have known that Blake was young or that he was unarmed in the heat of the moment? Should anyone know these things when they're facing a threat? How realistic is it to pause and analyze every detail to know these things? And there's a larger issue here that speaks to the context. A teenager out on the streets at 4 a.m., reportedly involved in suspicious activity. How did we get to this point, this crime in the first place? Where were the adults in Blake's life? Why was a child out in the early hours, unsupervised, and potentially engaging in crime? As we move forward, these questions will shape our understanding of this case and where accountability truly lies. Turning to the courtroom, we find two distinct perspectives, that of the prosecution and that of the defense. It's not a big mystery there. The prosecution argued that Jason Lewis's actions were reckless and excessive, suggesting he acted with force, a force that far outweighed any immediate threat posed by Karon Blake. They emphasized Blake's age, just 13, and the fact that he was unarmed, calling to question whether Lewis's fear of harm was reasonable. And they pointed to the fact that by choosing to step outside of his residence with a loaded gun, rather than calling the police, well, Lewis escalated the situation instead of de-escalating it. However, there's still the question to be raised about this approach. While they argue that Blake's age and unarmed status are critical, one must consider the reality of the moment Lewis found himself in. In a split-second decision, does someone facing a perceived threat have the time to assess details like age or the exact nature of the threat? Is it fair or reasonable to expect that Lewis should have paused and assessed whether the person moving toward him in the dark was a child or an adult, unarmed or potentially dangerous? In situations like these, the brain's natural response is often fight or flight. This is natural to human beings, and human beings ought to know this. For Lewis, his response fell under that instinctive reaction. Moreover, the prosecution's emphasis on Blake as a victim obscures a very difficult reality. Blake was out in the middle of the night, reportedly tampering with vehicles. Now, don't get me wrong, this fact absolutely does not justify a death sentence, but it does raise questions about personal accountability. Should the focus fall solely on Lewis's response, Or is there room to consider the choices and circumstances that led a 13-year-old child, really, to be in that position in the first place? For many watching this case, the frustration stems from this larger picture. Why wasn't the lack of guidance or parental supervision part of the accountability conversation? Now, we've seen in cases lately where the courts are calling on the parents to find out what was going on behind the scenes. Were they doing what they should? This is going to start happening more and more. This did not happen in this case. From the defense's standpoint, Jason Lewis was a man protecting his home and community, taking action when he believed a threat was present. The defense argued that his fear was reasonable given the circumstances. It was dark. Blake was moving toward him. Lewis didn't know whether Blake was armed or not, did not know what the intentions were. But to Lewis, this wasn't a question of age or innocence. This was about facing an unknown individual in a situation that felt dangerous and unpredictable. The defense questioned how realistic is it to expect a civilian to handle a situation with perfect calm or clarity, particularly under sudden stress. We know that law enforcement also struggles with this, and they are trained in it. The defense argued that when Blake moved toward Lewis, Lewis interpreted this movement as aggression, and in that split second, the defense maintained Lewis had little time to ask whether this individual was a teenager or unarmed, or maybe they were just bluffing. There's no time for that. In his mind, he acted out of genuine fear, he says, for his safety, and his response was one of survival. Yet there are limitations to this side as well. For example, by stepping outside armed in the first place, could have called 911. Lewis took on the risk of confronting instead of diffusing. This is also a true fact. Why not call for help? This is a separate situation altogether. Before the confrontation even happens, you do have a choice to contact law enforcement. So you need to find out why this person felt like they had to get out there immediately and didn't have time to call the police, right? And the defense argued that there wasn't enough time. But this decision placed him in a precarious position where one wrong interpretation could lead to a fatal outcome. Was he justified in taking matters into his own hands? Can we even figure that out? What was he thinking? Was there opportunity to resolve this incident peaceful, and he missed it? Even though the law may grant individuals the right to protect themselves, critics argue that this right should be balanced with caution, especially when deadly force is involved. And then there's the question of reasonableness. Was the risk to Lewis's life genuinely severe enough to warrant using a firearm? Well, the defense argued it was, but others believe that even with fear in play, he crossed a line. And this ultimately is what divided the court of public opinion. Was Lewis defending himself, or did he overact in a way that cost an innocent young life? Now, moving beyond the immediate case details, this situation brings up the broader implications of self-defense laws and the expectations placed on civilians when they do intervene in potential crimes. Self-defense laws are widely varied, but at their core, they're designed to protect individuals who genuinely believe their lives are in danger. Yet incidences like this one reveal those gray areas that these laws don't always cover, because they can't. What qualifies as reasonable fear? And to who and why? And when does self-defense shift into an unnecessary act of aggression? The tricky thing here is someone reacted, not sure if they had enough time to assess who this person was, and now someone is no longer here. The question is, if that person wasn't out there in the first place, the situation wouldn't have happened. More swirling questions. Who initiated this issue? The two sides to this? Well, if anyone can claim self-defense in situations where a clear threat is not visible, what message does that send? On the other hand, there's a sense among many that when we restrict the right to defense too tightly, we create environments where people feel vulnerable with very limited ways to protect themselves. The reality is, if you choose to self-defend, not many of those cases come out positively in court. So they give you the law, but then if you use it, it's very hard to defend your self-defending. This is also a fact. This case didn't just capture the attention of the courtroom. This quickly ignited debates in the community and even across the nation. For many, the tragedy surrounding Karon Blake's death highlighted long-standing issues about race and authority and the assumptions we make about people based on their appearance and the circumstances. Here was a young black teenager shot by an older, armed man who saw him as a potential threat in the dead of night. And I need to point this out to you. In all the media and everything that happened when this case first happened, they just talked about this older, armed man, Lewis. And of course we think, well, white man shot a young black man, and this is terrible because this happens, and it's bad because it is. However, in 2023 in January, the former Metropolitan Police Chief, Robert Conti III, had to address all of this directly in a press conference because it was very misleading. He had to clarify that Lewis was actually black. And all the conclusions and all the jumping to conclusions based on all the assumptions were incorrect. And these assumptions of white on black crime really get people riled up with good reason. But somehow we just don't want to put that out there when it's the same color attacking the same color. So I don't know why that is, but this took a while to get this out because people were confused. And part of the outrage was the fact that they thought it was white on black crime and nobody was fixing it. Just letting the public be out there standing for something they thought wasn't even true. Again, the media. So there was that aspect. A white man kills a young black man. An innocent, young, and unarmed black citizen. But some community members also argued that this case reflected a broader tendency to perceive black youth as inherently dangerous, regardless of the reality. So the fact that Karon was unarmed did little to shift that perception. In their view, fear often overrides logical judgment in the heat of the moment. Activists and leaders emphasize the need to challenge these deep-seated fears that, in certain circumstances, may lead people to act out of prejudice rather than reason. For those who rallied around Blake's memory, the tragedy became a symbol of the dangers faced by young black men across the country who are often seen as threats before they're seen as individuals. If this were a young white teenager, that discussion probably wouldn't have happened. How would we see a young white teenager as a threat? We can, because anyone outside doing something in the middle of the night to your car might be seen as a threat, black or white. And the public debate surrounding this case didn't stop at questions around race or self-defense, though. It delved into the heart of how we understand personal responsibility in our communities. One of the most pointed criticisms was directed at the adults in Karon's life. Okay, why was a 13-year-old boy out alone at that hour, seemingly unsupervised? And if he was engaging in risky behavior, where was the guidance, the support, the accountability that could have kept him safe? For many people, the circumstances that put Karon on the street were part of a larger issue of social responsibility, one that involves not only personal choices, but also the roles of family and community and society. This tragic event became a flashpoint for discussions on the limitations of self-defense laws and the fine line between protecting oneself and provoking a dangerous situation. Some argued that self-defense shouldn't automatically justify the use of deadly force, especially when there is no clear immediate threat. In their view, allowing civilians to act as neighborhood enforcers could lead to more harm than good. Others pointed to cases like this as proof that self-defense laws needed more stringent guidelines, especially regarding situations involving youth. And with youth, if we're finding out that more and more youth are finding and taking in illegal firearms, what should our assumption be there? That no one has any? How do we handle this? There were also questions about the role of law enforcement in this case. Critics argue that had the police been called initially, this situation may have been resolved without violence. Probably would have been. For those watching this case unfold, it highlighted that bigger question about the responsibilities and limitations of civilians. Ultimately, this case left a community grappling with a tragedy, with a lot involved. It left the public questioning the system. The death of Blake brought the issue of civilian intervention into sharp relief, forcing us to confront those uncomfortable truths about what we believe is fair and safe and just. And as the court of public opinion continued to weigh in, one thing became clear. This case struck a nerve because it wasn't just about a single night or a single incident. It was about what we're willing to accept when fear meets action, and how much we're willing to forgive when a tragedy unfolds in the name of self-defense. After months of investigation, community debate, and a tense trial, the jury did reach a verdict in the case of Jason Lewis. He was found guilty of manslaughter in the death of Karon Blake, a charge that underscored the court's belief that Lewis's actions went beyond reasonable self-defense. The conviction reflected the prosecution's argument that, regardless of his intentions, Lewis's decision to confront and ultimately shoot an unarmed teenager was excessive. This sentence handed down could see Lewis facing up to 45 years in prison. This verdict sent a strong message, but it also left many people divided. For those supporting Lewis, the manslaughter conviction felt harsh, given the difficult split-second choices he faced that night. And they argued that Lewis was attempting to protect the neighborhood in a situation that seemed threatening. If self-defense laws need something before you can defend yourself, then maybe the laws should include that. The law says if you perceive a threat, you can defend yourself. But then it is that very perception that is always on trial. Is the fact that we have self-defense laws really something that is helping society? The self-defense laws have so many things around them. You need a checklist before you can actually defend yourself. How does that work? And this is something to consider. But now on the other side, for Blake's family and those supporters, this conviction brought a sense of justice, if bittersweet. They felt it acknowledged the tragic loss of a young life and served as a reminder of the weight of responsibility that comes with carrying a firearm and choosing to take action. This verdict became yet another point of debate as people across the country questioned whether justice had truly been served. What does it mean to take advantage of self-defense laws? Is that even reasonable? As we come to the end of this case, it's time to consider everything we've covered. We've looked at the facts and the arguments from both sides, the broader questions. It challenges us to think about the limits of self-defense. It challenges us to think about 13-year-olds out in the middle of the night and how to assess that. How to assess the heat of the moment. What does that mean? And so here we are, left with questions that have divided both the courtroom and the public. The court has made its decision, but the public remains conflicted. Was this truly a case of self-defense? Or did Jason Lewis cross a line that night? The legal system has spoken, but now it's up to you to decide what you believe is fair and just. In a world where safety and fear are often at odds, where do we draw the line? Is it on the individual to weigh every risk and act cautiously? Or should we all have the freedom to defend our communities as we see fit? What's in the middle? What is realistic and reasonable? This case shows us that these answers are not clear-cut. Sometimes they raise even more questions. What do you think? Thank you for joining me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. Stay safe out there. Stay curious, ask the questions. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.